Thank you guys so much for coming to the library for this special event. Thank you to the Friends of the Library, which supports all of our library programs. We have copies of the Blue Plate for sale in the foyer, courtesy of One More Page Books, and we'll be doing a book signing after the panel program. Thanks also to Virginia Cooperative Extension for providing our delicious and sustainable small bites, and to Chef Gina for the cocktail tastings that we've been enjoying, mocktail. Please join me now in welcoming Matt DeFerenti, Board Chair for Arlington County, who has a few remarks.
It's non-alcoholic, just for the record there. Thank you so much for coming tonight. What a great crowd. I suspected, and they told me it would be a great crowd. I'm thrilled to be here. Busy day, but such an important moment for a great panel. You guys are in for an extraordinary treat. I will stay as long as I possibly can, but I have 2 kids under 2.5, so I may not make it for every moment, but I'll do my best. We're launching Arlington's Community Action Plan in addition to having an outstanding panel. And this is a big moment for me in addition to Arlington because the Community and Climate Action Plan are critical elements. And I mentioned community because 95% of climate emissions are not about county government, but they're about the actions that you take and that we take as a community together. So thrilled to be here. I want to thank our outstanding panelists. I was sort of serially seeking to get to know them as well as I could. You're in for a treat. Each of them has outstanding organizations and perspective. And let's also give it up for the book that I'm about to read. I haven't finished, Mark Easter. So this is Arlington Reads Stir It Up, and give a hand, just an introductory hand to Climate and Cuisine by author Mark Easter, please. We're joined by 3 people who in a very short time showed me a great sense of humor. Imani Black, founder and CEO of Minorities in Aquaculture. Samantha Kuhn, executive director of JK Community Farm. And Gina Shirsavani. My last name is DeFerenti, so, you know, it's... So, chef and owner of Buffalo and Bergen, which I think there's a fourth location that's opening in Arlington soon. We have the book that is about a food lover's guide to climate chaos, and we have also the tabling that happened tonight. I got a chance to pass by so many friends who are part of Virginia Cooperative Extension, which is a fantastic organization that is the connective tissue that helps make so much of what we do go well. I have to particularly thank our libraries team. If you could just thank, reading is fundamental, and they are at the lead of that. Please thank our libraries team. And thank you to our Climate Policy Office. There are probably, and it's not my idea, it's a friend of mine's, there are probably 2 defining issues of our time, and one of them is climate change, and the other is income inequity and income inequality, in my humble opinion. And so with that, I just want to acknowledge one of my colleagues, Vice Chair Maureen Coffey, is right here in the front row. Susan Cunningham is right there, right over there. And I think that's it. We have our other 2 colleagues are also trying to be at another event that's important in a different way. It's outreaches with our Latino community, which in this moment I hope you can appreciate. The climate action is linked to our climate resolution, which my 2 colleagues were central to making happen. I had been on the board and trying to do work, but we came together in support of a resolution that makes clear that climate change is urgent, inaction carries real costs, and the responsibility is shared, as I mentioned, government, business, community. The plan, the action plan that we're launching tonight is the steps. Highfalutin rhetoric without actions and steps to make that happen is not worth it. And a critical part of the work is recognizing the intersection between climate and food. I think back to a decade plus ago with some of the Michael Pollan books, and there's so much more that we can do. So, thrilled to be with you. Food systems are a source of greenhouse gases, many of you know, both production, transportation, and food is also one of the most immediate ways when climate overtakes us, when there is flooding, the food banks have to be there to feed those who can't get to food, if you can't get access to food. There are impacts in our grocery bills, our restaurants, our farms and neighborhoods. Food systems are critical. We're connecting climate policy to everyday life tonight. Where we eat, where it comes from, how we dispose of it, and who has access are all critical questions. So, enough of me. With the launch of the Climate Action Plan, we're defining what climate action in Arlington looks like. We are committed to carbon neutrality, but we'll make sure that it's done in a practical, cost-effective, and equitable way. Help communities like Arlington become stronger, more resilient by focusing on solutions that improve the environment, economy, and quality of life. Thanks again for being here. Thrilled for the conversation. And I'm going to turn it over to the one who's going to help make it all happen, which is Jennifer Fioretti, our Assistant County Manager for Climate Policy, who those of us on the board did some fighting for to make sure she could do this job. Thanks so much.
All right, well, thank you for the warm welcome, and good evening, everyone. We're so glad to have you here tonight to celebrate the launch of Arlington County's first Climate Action Plan. When I was a kid, my father had a garden that seemed to stretch forever. And in the summer, I would spend countless hours with him pulling weeds, picking tomatoes, learning about when the right time to pick a cucumber was, and pulling weeds. Did I mention that? Yeah, definitely pulling weeds. And he would say to me, what we grow, we eat. What we don't eat, we share. And it was a simple lesson, but it stuck with me. And looking back, I realized that the garden wasn't just about growing food. It taught me what it means to be sustainable, even if I didn't have the words at the time to describe it. And so now that I'm looking, at this room, this is an opportunity to sort of bring that memory full circle, bringing it here tonight to talk about sustainability, and be thoughtful about what we use our land for, how do we cook our food, and what do we do with our waste, for example? So in thinking about the event tonight, we wanted to do something more than just talk about sustainable food. We wanted to taste it. And so we asked ourselves the question, what does sustainable food look like? What's climate-friendly food look like? And that's what you have before you today. You've probably eaten it already, but and if you haven't, hopefully you were able to grab a bite before entering the auditorium and a drink. And that's because of some incredible people that put all of this together. So I want to especially thank Virginia Cooperative Extension. They are Arlington's partners, but they are also a partnership of Virginia Tech and Virginia State University, and their primary goal is to bring education and practical resources to our community and communities like ours across the state. I also want to thank Chef Gina for the incredible mocktails. It was so tasty. And also our Climate Policy Office and library team and Arlington Television, who made all of this possible tonight. I hope before we end this event tonight, you have an opportunity to meet some of the incredible staff that are not only making this night possible, but are underpinning a lot of the work that's happening to help support our climate action plan now and into the future. So just a little bit about the food. So we talked about climate-friendly food. And what we really wanted to see was something that had low climate impact, that was also purchased locally with minimal processing, plant-based, affordable. So these plant-forward meals should be really easy to make, generally require less land, less water, fewer emissions, as opposed to resource-intensive food. And this connects the whole key idea from tonight's featured book, The Blue Plate, A Food Lover's Guide to Climate Chaos. And the book reminds us that climate change is affecting every stage of our food system, from the soil that we use to grow crops, to the water used to irrigate those crops, to fertilizer production, harvesting, transportation, refrigeration, cooking, and finally disposal. So every step has a climate impact. And climate change is already affecting our farming. We see growing seasons that are shifting, heat and drought are reducing our crop yields, and extreme weather is disrupting our supply chains. What ends up in our plate is directly connected to the stability of our climate. But the story doesn't just end on our plate. Food waste in landfills produce methane, which is a powerful greenhouse gas. And that's why we're composting at tonight's event. So by composting food scraps, we return the nutrients to the soil instead of sending them to landfills. It's a small but meaningful example of closing the loop in the food life cycle. And all of this reflects a much bigger picture behind tonight's celebration, the launch of our climate action plan. And this plan is a roadmap to reducing pollution, strengthening resilience, and building a healthier, more sustainable Arlington. Climate action isn't just about big projects and ideas, it's about everyday decisions. What we eat, for example, how we source it, how we cook it, how we dispose of it. These choices multiplied across all of Arlington add up. So as you all enjoy the bites and the drinks, I invite you to think about what else you can change, however small, to help support the effort. And think about the conversations that you'll have at home or with your friends. Because climate action doesn't just exist in policy documents, we certainly can't do it alone. It lives in kitchens, grocery stores, gardens, and events like this. So thank you so much for being here, showing up, and celebrating the launch of our climate action plan. And I really hope to see many of you as part of our engagement going forward. Up next, you'll hear from our featured author, Mark Easter. He is a Colorado-based ecologist, greenhouse gas accountant, and author. His book, The Blue Plate, A Food Lover's Guide to Climate Change, explores the production, consumption, and disposal of many of our favorite foods and offers a thoughtful and nuanced analysis of these foods' impact on the environment. The Blue Plate won a gold medal from the Independent Book Publishers Association and was a finalist for the 2025 James Beard Media Award and the Colorado Book Award. Please join me in welcoming Mark.
All right. Cheers, everybody. Wonderful, are you there? Okay. Thank you so much. Can you all hear me okay? Wow. Thank you for that kind and wonderful introduction, and I'm really grateful to the other panelists, Imani, Samantha, Gina. Thanks for joining this event up here. There's been an incredible amount of work done behind the scenes that I've just watched from afar, and it's really extraordinary, the work that all of you are doing around climate action. I live in Fort Collins, Colorado, home of Colorado State University, where I've lived for 31 years, and my family has deep roots in Colorado, And it's interesting to see these same sorts of efforts that we've been engaged in, but with a different focus, a different food system, different energy system, different sorts of issues related to, you have the oceans here, we have the Great Plains and the mountains, all of them influencing how we're trying to live sustainably, how we're trying to live well, how to live good lives in these places. And so I just want to applaud you all for this good work that you're doing looking forward, because it's this kind of local leadership right now that extends to state and federal programs that we see over and over again. So please give yourself a hand for all this good work you're doing. Are there any, I just want to get a sense, are there any gardeners here in the audience? Hands up. All right. Any farmers? I know there's some over here. We have watermen here, oyster farmers. Are there any soil scientists? Okay, there's one in the back. You're going to have to keep me honest here tonight. All right. Before I get started, I first want to encourage you all to have a look at this organization, Zero Foodprint. Anthony Mint wrote the foreword to the Blue Plate. He's been a longtime colleague doing really good work in this space, also a James Beard Award winner. And so I encourage you to check out the work that they're doing and support them if you get the opportunity. Okay. So how many people remember, who are here in the room, remember when this image first came out? All right, a small number here. So this is one of the first images that we had of space. I was 8 years old when this image came back shortly after the Apollo astronauts from Apollo 8 came home. It was taken on December 21st, or 24th, 1968. This was my own first personal experience with what's now known as the overview effect, when people travel to space and have an opportunity to view the Earth from space. Obviously, I wasn't there, but the photographs that came back, they had a big impact on me. And this is the first time that I realized that, when I saw this image, I immediately recognized it as home. And I know a lot of other people that I've spoken with over the years about this image had the first experience like that, and perhaps those of you who saw it at that time also had that feeling. What was remarkable about that is how it stuck with me, and this was this image was the influence for me for the name The Blue Plate, because in my experience as an ecologist working in sustainable food systems and working as a greenhouse gas accountant, I've come to realize with my colleagues that kind of like Michael Grunwald talked about in his book, We Are Eating the Planet, we've been consuming the planet in the process of trying to grow food. And what I've seen through all the hopeful, positive work of farmers and ranchers working in regenerative agriculture is changing that paradigm so that rather than consuming the earth, we can eat from the earth, and calling the earth a blue plate of sorts. This photo also gives me a strong sense of that overview effect because it reminds me of how thin the atmosphere is. The work I do as a greenhouse gas accountant, we're trying to understand the exchange of carbon and nitrogen between the Earth system and the atmosphere. It's that simple. Carbon and nitrogen going into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and other gases, and then potentially coming back into soils, into forests, into rock, and other pools in the planet, trying to understand that flow of carbon and nitrogen. And whenever I see this image of the Earth's atmosphere, I'm struck by how thin it is, and how it's just like this tiny film that's responsible for keeping the Earth's climate intact. It's been maintaining, regulating the Earth's climate, made it possible for humans to live here. About 10 years before that photo from Apollo 8 was taken, Dr. Dave Keeling began collecting carbon dioxide measurements from the summit of Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii on the Big Island. And what he learned, what he and his team learned there was extraordinary. They found that concentrations went up and down with the seasons. We found that the Earth was breathing. That was the very first view of this. They also found over time that concentrations of carbon dioxide were going up. Now, that was expected, but this was the first direct measurement that showed that this was actually happening. And it was a measurement that confirmed the findings of Dr. Eunice Foote, measurements that were taken more than a century earlier and published about the first understanding that carbon dioxide could actually influence the Earth's climate. And in fact, research has shown time and time again that it's the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that is the main primary indicator of what the Earth's climate is going to be, how warm it will be. We've seen this over and over again. That rise in carbon dioxide concentrations, along with we're now seeing alarming rises in methane and nitrous oxide, at the time spurred the countries of the world to get together and sign a treaty. It was called, it's popularly known as the Earth Summit. The wonky term is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And that was signed in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro. And that was the first time the countries of the world got together and agreed there's an alarming trend here. We're concerned about what the consequences could be. Global warming was not a crisis at that point, but the scientific community had been sounding the alarm for a number of years up to that point. With the signing of the Earth Summit Treaty came the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And through the treaty, the countries of the world agreed that they would add up what the greenhouse gas emissions from their countries were, the principal sources of global warming, using transparent methods, and then report those emissions to each other in a transparent way so that we all knew, to the best of our knowledge, what the emissions were, but more importantly, what could be done about it. It was an auspicious move because whereas at the time we had a pretty good understanding that when you burn stuff, coal, natural gas, gasoline, diesel fuel, that it creates pollution, and that pollution has carbon consequences for the atmosphere, could warm the climate. At that time, we didn't know what the extent of the role of ecosystems were in that process. We knew there were methane emissions from cattle, from wetlands, but we didn't know how large they were. In fact, we'd only known for about 7 years at that point that methane was even a greenhouse gas. So the scientific community at that time really buckled down through the IPCC, and we and others dove in, and we essentially created the scientific discipline of greenhouse gas accounting. And a fascinating thing came from that. It was about 2012. I had been working at Colorado State for about 13 years at that point, and a report came out that showed that about a third of human-caused greenhouse gas emissions came from the food system. And that was like a thunderclap to me and a lot of my colleagues. We were frankly shocked at how large that total contribution was. The other thing that was interesting from an academic, from a scientific standpoint, was that it wasn't from, the majority of that was not from burning fossil fuels. It was from microbes. The majority was from microbes in the soil and in the guts of animals and the depths of landfills. And then what we've only been learning in detail over the last maybe 15 years, the depths of reservoirs that are used to store irrigation water. The majority of that came not from burning fossil fuels, from growing crops, from raising livestock, and from dealing with the leftovers in the landfills. And as I write in the book's introduction, I had an epiphany in a grocery store that evening after coming across that first study. And I wrote, "What formerly had been to me this pure elemental thing, the product of evolutionary miracles, was suddenly tainted with the chemical stench of steel, diesel exhaust, and factory smokestacks. Not only that, but the individual whispers of microbes collected into a deafening roar of the powerful climate-heating trace gases all their tiny bodies emit. The sum total of it was enormous. For me, food transitioned from being something soft and almost mythical into something entirely new, both cold and hard, with dimensions I'd never imagined." I was just struck that these creatures that you see here on the image right here, so we have fungi, we have archaea, bacteria, protists, tardigrades, other arthropods, we have annelids, other types of worms, and my favorite, nematodes. Just this, all these names you probably remember from high school and maybe college biology. The sum total of these things, uncountable trillions and quadrillions. Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes would call it a gazillion. Just an uncountable number of these organisms. The sum total of them were the source of those emissions. But what we've also found is that when we work with these organisms, when we work with these ecosystems in the soil and in the guts of animals and landfills and other places, we can actually reduce those emissions dramatically. And in some cases, we can reverse them. And it's a hopeful story. I think one of the most interesting stories really involves grains and bread. And this photo was taken by my nephew, Jeremiah Traeger. And I think one of the things that we've learned in our work in the scientific community trying to understand what these greenhouse gas emissions is that every food item has a story. This loaf, these 2 loaves of bread, obviously delicious and beautiful, they have a specific story about them, where Jeremiah got the flour, where he got his sourdough culture, how he formed the loaf, the oven that he baked it in. But there are similar stories that are associated with bread, and we find the same stories looping back and forth with other food items as well, too. And so growing grain, it begins with tilling the soil, and then seeds get planted, fertilizers get applied, or some other soil amendment to provide nutrients to the soil. In some cases, pesticides, fungicides are applied, herbicides. The grain gets harvested. It gets shipped to millers. The flour gets milled. Then it gets shipped to bakers. The bread gets baked, or pasta gets made, or some other product. And then finally, in the end, there's waste, and the waste goes into a landfill. And when you examine, there's carbon emissions associated with each one of these steps, this story associated with bread. And whether it's bread, or you go to beef, or dairy, or fruit, or oysters, there's similar stories that where we examine the emissions that come from that life cycle of these foods, we can add up what the total, what we call a carbon footprint associated with this is. And we call it a carbon footprint. It's just the legacy of emissions associated with it. And so this air that we're breathing today here, this air that we walk through, that we drive through, that's all around us, it has weight. And when there's emissions into the atmosphere from these things, those have weight. It's measured in pounds of carbon dioxide or methane or nitrous oxide. And we consolidate that into a common carbon footprint. And we call it, we call it the carbon legacy. And again, what's so interesting about this is the majority is not from burning fossil fuels. It's from these three key points here. This is where the microbes really get involved. Tilling the soil stimulates loss of carbon from the soil. Applying fertilizers sends microbes into a tizzy to release nitrous oxide. And then throwing that 40% of food in America that we don't consume into the landfill stimulates methane production there. So I've got some photos here from the foods that our panelists are responsible for. Imani is an oyster farmer and has spent her career working in that space. Gina is a chef, and that's a wonderful looking knish from Buffalo and Bergen, her place. It looks fantastic. And then Samantha is a producer of vegetables. I'm showing these, and also I had oysters for lunch today. I've got an oyster shell here. All of these are very low carbon footprint foods. They're plant forward, or one example of animal-based protein that has a stunningly low carbon footprint. And I'll just tell you, I'm giving away a clue here for the quiz that's coming a little bit later on. So sharpen your pencils. So in the book, I've been able to work with a number of different farmers from around the country to profile the stories of the carbon emissions behind the foods they produce. And so, whoops. What's going on here? Bear with us for a second. Well, here, I'll use the mouse. It's a good time to take a drink from your mocktail here. I do want to say that I've been really fortunate to do book events around the country talking about the book. And there's been food at every one of these from the region, and this is the first time for mocktails, so thank you, Gina. All right, there we go. Thank you for that. So I profiled farmer Steve Ela, a fruit grower in western Colorado. Indian Ridge Farm, also in western Colorado, produces pasture-raised chicken. Sunspot Urban Farm in Fort Collins produces low-carbon vegetables with almost no fertilizer. Hog Island Oyster Company in Tamales Bay, north of San Francisco. Curtis Sales and Dan DeSutter, ranchers and farmers in eastern Colorado and Indiana, producing low-carbon grains along with their livestock. Albert Strauss from from Marin County in California, producing low-carbon dairy products. And then finally, this A1 Organics north of Denver, which collects food waste. And I try to tell the story of the carbon emissions from each of these. So here's the quiz. We'll close this with this, and we'll move to the panel discussion. So which of these plant-based foods has the smallest climate impact? And so how many think it's tomatoes and other vegetables? Dried pinto beans. All right, walnuts, hazelnuts. All right, and bread. All right, here's the big reveal. Now, I want to emphasize here, these are extremely low emissions. These emissions in the range of like 1 to 1.5 or less than 1, negative. These are amongst the lowest carbon emissions for any food in the that you'll find. Okay, one more quiz. Whoops. All right. Which of these sources of animal protein has the smallest climate impact? Okay. All right. I'm hearing oysters. Yes, that's fresh oysters and mussels. And the reason why, much like the trees accumulate all this carbon through photosynthesis. They build it up in the wood. Oysters, they're taking dissolved carbon dioxide from seawater, and they're working, it appears to be, in concert with microbes, lo and behold, to turn that carbon dioxide into, for all intents and purposes, is rock, is limestone, they're shells. And these shells are going to keep that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere forever from a human standpoint. Short of dropping this into boiling acid, it will stay out of the atmosphere. That's one of the reasons that farmed mussels, oysters, clams, and scallops are such a low-carbon food source. So with that, I'll leave you all with this wonderful quote from Barry Lopez, a writer I deeply admire. And thank you all for your kind attention, and we'll move on to the panel discussion.
Mark, thank you so much for that excellent introduction to tonight's topic. That will really help frame our discussion. So let me now take a moment to introduce tonight's panelists who will be joining Mark in conversation. You've already heard a little bit about them, but I'll go into a little bit more detail. Imani Black is an oyster farmer who was born and raised on the eastern shore of Maryland. Imani comes from a long family history of watermen that dates back over 200 years. Through her love of aquaculture, Imani founded Minorities in Aquaculture, MIA, a nonprofit organization that strives to empower and support underrepresented demographics in the aquaculture industry. Overall, MIA has built an impactful network focused on sustainable seafood education and aquaculture workforce development. Please join me in welcoming Imani Black. Samantha Kuhn is the executive director of the JK Community Farm. JK Community Farm is a 150-acre working farm practicing regenerative, sustainable, chemical-free, four-season agriculture and growing solely for the food insecure. With a staff of just 3, and therefore also relying on volunteer support, the farm grows over 50 varieties of vegetables, fruit, protein, and herbs on 14 acres of outdoor fields, 2 high tunnels, a greenhouse, and 14 raised beds. I hope I got that right. The crops are selected to be best suited to the season and to the families that are served. Please join me in welcoming Samantha Kuhn. Gina Chersavani started her career in spirits over 25 years ago in Washington, D.C. She eventually struck out on her own with her woman-owned, soda shop and deli-inspired restaurant Buffalo and Bergen, of which there are currently 3 locations at D.C.'s Union Market, Cleveland Park, and Capitol Hill. And we're excited that a 4th will soon be opening right down the street in Clarendon. Gina has a made-from-scratch philosophy. She manages an historic Maryland farm where she cultivates produce and herbs and raises heritage chickens. She strives to source the food for her restaurants from farms within a 50-mile radius, including her own, and has an enduring commitment to supporting women and sustainability in the hospitality industry. Please join me in welcoming Gina Chersavani.
So, I mean, I think you took it away in your presentation when you talked about oysters. Oysters and oyster farming in general is was declared a double net positive for the environment. So I think when it comes to a climate crusader and a climate fighter, oysters are the number one guy or the number one rock. But yeah, in my work, I started as an oyster farmer and on the Eastern Shore of Maryland and in different parts of Virginia, working on, in different age levels of oysters. So all the way from babies to when it gets on your dinner plate. From start to finish, everything is very intentionally curated so that the oyster has the most viable life. We are not, disrupting it with antibiotics or anything like that. We were just basically creating its natural environment in a controlled setting, just so we can have a guesstimation of numbers, honestly. We're not counting millions and millions of baby oysters at a time. But yeah, in my work now with minorities in aquaculture, I think there's two ways that climate comes into play that a lot of people don't really consider. Obviously, it's the oyster side and the seafood side, but then it's also the people side. Without the workforce, without the stewards of climate change or climate crusaders within aquaculture and within the maritime industry, we wouldn't have sustainable seafood, and we wouldn't have people that build their facilities or build their operations in place, that are trying to fight that at the same time. So I think it's a mix, definitely within aquaculture for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that particularly in the Chesapeake Bay with the oyster population, we had to be resilient. I mean, in the 1990s, for those of you who don't know, our oyster population got wiped down to less than 1% because of oyster diseases. It was a compound of everything at one time, but oyster diseases were kind of the last final nail in the coffin. And so since then, we've been trying to kind of build that back. And that's why aquaculture was originally introduced in the Chesapeake Bay in the 1990s, was because we needed something that was going to fight against the oyster diseases so that didn't happen anymore, but also give the wild population some time to kind of rebound and restore and be preserved. An oyster that we didn't need to go out into the wild to get, so that could sort of rest and that we could satisfy the market, satisfy the commercial demand with, farmed oysters. So really, aquaculture is a buddy system for the wild population in that resilience and has been since the 1990s. So I think in general, the oyster industry really kind of embodies it because it was built on that foundation. And I think that even oysters in themselves, they're very resilient, not when they're babies, but when they get to be adults. They're really resilient. They can kind of go through anything. They can go through low tide. They can go through different salinity changes, different weather changes, and they're just resilient. And so that's why we see them in a lot of like living shorelines and things like that, just because just oysters within themselves, they're the oyster reefs and all the kind of things that make up oysters are really resilient and help us be resilient too. A lot of people don't love to talk about that part of oysters because we like to eat oysters. But yeah, they are, they are a keystone species of the Chesapeake Bay, and that is their main function, is to filter the water, and is to, purify it in that way. Oysters, it's a range. Now scientists are coming out and saying it's only 35 gallons a day, but the number is 50 gallons a day that one single oyster can filter. And so imagine, you have an oyster farmer, each individual oyster farmer in the Chesapeake Bay puts out 1 million individual oysters on their lease. And so even if those oysters are in there for a week, a month, a year, that's a lot of oysters that are working overtime together to really kind of clean up the area that they're in.
Basically, it becomes its own natural uncooked syrup, and then added non-alcoholic gin. There's nothing that we threw out. Everything went into the egg and the pits and everything. This is where you should be striving to use. And I did use a compostable glass just to make sure that everybody knows when you buy them from the wholesaler, they don't have to have a little green leaf. They are compostable. But I think that this should be the goal of everybody, and especially in my industry. I serve hundreds and hundreds of people every day in all locations, counting 7 days a week. And this isn't a joke. 600-700 people have gone through your door. one small difference makes a huge difference. Not throwing somebody away and using it all in the end and not putting that scrap in the trash is absolutely amazing. Even the ends of the cucumbers, which nobody wants to eat in their sandwiches, they all get fed to chickens, and that's pretty amazing. I too have to go home, and there are farms around me, so it's not that I don't actually drive the car as open as I do have to get there. So it just kind of takes the ride with me. The Union Market, we have disposable programs going on now with all their food waste. But as for the zero, we are striving every day to get closer and closer to zero, and that means like our trash will only wind up being, very minimal and small amounts. But I think that like all of us, you have your own restaurants at home, which in the kitchen, right? You can make that same decision by buying what you need. We do buy more often than most restaurants do. Smaller amounts. We don't stock for a month. Trash. I know, crazy, right? I just live like my grandmother did, in 1950 when she was born, right? So her mother really did this, and this is what I'm here to do. So I'm just trying to figure that.
So we've got, you three all have really unique places in the food system for us. And I'm just, much of our food system sustainability and climate impact is really invisible to the rest of us. And I was just wondering, what do you wish more people understood about how food gets from farm to plate and how that process affects sustainability and the climate?
Am I first? Oh man. Is it working? Can everybody hear me? Okay, perfect. Wow, this is a loaded question when it comes to seafood. Because I'm sure everyone has, that has Netflix has seen the documentaries. I don't even have to say the name of the documentary. You've seen it. There's a campaign going on right now of, don't eat seafood because that's bad for the planet. I'm just here to tell you that not eating eating seafood is really good for the planet. The way that we make it good for the planet is if you know where your seafood is coming from. We have to get really back to basics on just all of where our food is coming from, but especially seafood. And there's different ways of doing that. You don't have to, I was just having this conversation before this of like, aquaculture, I guess that means you're against, the salmon farming. And I'm like, well, not all salmon farms are built the same. I personally worked at a salmon farm. It was only for 6 months because I can't scoop out dead fish at 6 a.m., but that's for some people. But I worked at a salmon farm in upstate New York that is completely zero waste. It's a steelhead trout farm that's right on the Hudson River. And instead of putting, their discharge water back into the Hudson, they flush it into their basement for their multi-million-dollar hemp business that is then using it for sustainable bedding. So if you knew that farm existed, if that trout existed, then you would go and buy that trout, right? But so it's all about like what you know and who you choose to support. That's how we can be more sustainable with seafood. There's so much more to seafood than just going to a fancy restaurant and eating it. It tastes better, you know it better, but also you can feel more like good about your decisions when you get it directly from the source. And I know that not everybody has that capability and that privilege to, but even with our canned tuna, right? Dolphin safe tuna is not a thing. It's only a thing if you look at the label and it says it was caught by rod and reel, right? If it was caught by anything else, that is not dolphin safe. There's no way that it can be. So it's like little things like that of just educating yourself about the different little languages on your seafood labels that could just, like Gina said, like little small changes can make you even that much more sustainable and supporting sustainable seafood as you move forward.
All right, thank you.
I totally agree, and it's the same as in vegetable production too. If you don't know your farmer or where your food is coming from, I wouldn't trust an organic label in the grocery store. You shouldn't either. It's that our food system is very flawed, and just assuming that something that you see in the grocery, it might say organic, and then you look on the other side and this was shipped from Italy. Like, you think that is better for the climate? It's very flawed. Any of the farms around us, small market gardens, they can't afford the organic certification. They're growing beyond organic, chemical free. They're following everything. They're not going to pay. So knowing your farmer is is the best way to have sustainable food on your plate. And it's hard because the system is so broken. Everyone, especially the families that we're serving at the farm, the families are working 2 jobs, you have kids to take care of, and then you have to advocate for your own food. You have to sift through things that are being marketed, convenience locations, all of these other ways to get your food, and then you have to dig and find something that your family actually deserves to eat. It's not readily available. You have to go to a specialty market to find high quality, nutrient dense food, or you have to go to a farmer's market that's only open on Saturdays, and then you have to buy food for the week that's not going to make it through the week. So the system is working against everyone. So it's hard to get there, but knowing your farmer is the best way to do it, for sure.
I think for me in the restaurant business, and the fact that I'm in fast casual, is accepting that when you go to sometimes these restaurants that try to maintain a program like sustainability, is to accept the fact that you're not going to get avocados every time of year, or you're not going to get cucumbers, or I'm not going to have heirloom tomatoes. This time of year, I don't. I really barely do anything with tomatoes. But in August, every year we give away tomatoes for a week for free because we have so many tomatoes that instead of them anything going to waste or trying to charge you for it, we just have this thing called Tomato de Festa, and you get heirloom tomatoes on anything you want for the whole week, on anything in our restaurant. You can come there and just eat them and take them home. But that is really something that we need to all get back to when you say broken, right? You don't have to eat like what you eat in the summer and expect that to be what you eat all year long. You have to diversify into what a winter crop is, or what, broccoli and cauliflower and, more root vegetables are. And not eating the leaves, or eating the leaves of, or learning how to eat the leaves of a root vegetable. And these are things that a lot of customers turn their nose up to, because they're like, I want like a leafy green lettuce. Well, lettuce in the winter is harder. Like, you want a lettuce, you're going to get a harder version of it. So accepting the seasonality of a sustainable restaurant without the Instagram is how we're going to get there. And instead of like saying they didn't have my avocado, well, we're not going to have them. They're not produced this time of year. That's it.
Wonderful.
Also, they're terrible for the environment because they go from so many places that you should not be eating avocados from. Okay, sorry. I sell them, but it's against my better judgment sometimes.
So know your farmer, if at all possible, and eat seasonally. Don't expect to eat in January a fresh tomato that is an heirloom tomato that would be like the epitome of freshness, like you can find in July or August.
Yes.
All right, wonderful. All right, so I subscribe to a publication called Nutrition Action. It comes from an organization called the Center for Science and the Public Interest here in Washington, D.C. Are any of you familiar with this? Put in a plug for it. Yeah, so they had a great article in the most recent issue. It was an interview with Dr. Walter Willett from Harvard University, and Walter was working on something over the years called the planetary health diet, and here's how he described it, a more climate-friendly diet. He said, first of all, it's flexible. There's no single form of planetary health diet. It could be omnivore, it could be vegan, or some vegetarian version in between. But it's very plant-forward. It emphasizes plant sources of protein, such as nuts, beans, and lentils, and soy products like tofu and tempeh. And then he says this: it can also include modest amounts of animal-sourced foods like poultry, dairy, and fish, depending on your personal and cultural preferences. Red and processed meats are limited, but not eliminated. I thought that was an interesting way to describe this from an expert coming in the field, and he framed what I think we could describe as a prescription for our food future. And I'm just curious how this intersects with your own work, especially with there's a lot of discussion about, well, how much meat should we eat? But we are, culturally, we are a meat-based society here in America. And it's a really big deal for us. And I think it's worth discussing. Yeah.
I definitely. So I own Buffalo and Bergen. If you don't know what it is a bagels. It's bagels and brunch foods and stuff like that. It's very interesting to see the shift in. This is like naturally happening over the 14 years that I've had this store, and all my locations. It is. It's shifting naturally into less meat, less demand on the meat, and more on. Doing vegan spreads or more vegetarian, increasing our spreads that are available, like with cream cheese and stuff like that. And I think it's happening because people are starting to realize that. But it's only in this country that people eat so heavily on the meat side and not on the vegetable side. And I think it's part of the advertising of what you're supposed to be eating. It is, it's the lobbyists and it's the commercials and it's what you think, and it's, someone screaming in your face, macros, macros, macros. We can get macros from other things, and you're like, okay. So I think that I think this area is a very educated area, and when it comes to like food, and I think that just watching it naturally change has been very interesting. So I think that's pretty great.
So your customers, or you feel like your customers are helping to drive that demand for more plant-forward menu?
Absolutely. And then wanting to know where our eggs come from. This is like the first time ever that like I now have people like, and what farm are these eggs from this week? And I'm like, oh my God, these are from my friends down the street in Middletown, and they have blah, 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 and we'll show you pictures of their chickens, and the egg colors will be, blue and pink and copper colored. And they're like, oh, do you guys dye the eggs? And we're like, no, these are what eggs look like.
Like, that conversation is wild to me. I've had to literally ruin people's days because they're like, I don't like dirty chicken eggs. And I'm like, oh, baby. Oh, baby. You like the white ones from the grocery store? That's not an egg.
Yeah, it's not.
It's not an egg.
I agree. And then yes, that is it, right? So when you start, and then also eating uglier produce, right? Like when your produce is so pretty, there's so much that goes into making it that's so pretty. It's like terrible. I almost appreciate when I get those funky looking tomatoes that come in, and I'm like, and then the farmer's like apologizing, and I'm like, Danny, I don't care what they look like. They taste great. Like, so they're not uniformed. Who cares? It's okay. So, sorry.
I think that ties into to just like eggs and vegetables. Meat can be grown the same way. Like a lot of the red meat that people talk about is red meat raised in a CAFO. That is not the same as regeneratively grazed, rotationally grazed beef. And that I think that the impact on our soil that beef livestock that's raised like that is great. If our livestock, which we have at the farm, we are proud to donate protein to our food pantry partners too, because it allows everyone to have a full meal, everything that they need for a full meal, and rely less on highly processed foods. And if we're able to rotate our livestock on our vegetable fields, that's less that we're spending on compost. We're not buying animal-based compost in our fields. It's great.
So I'm just following up on that. I'm curious, where do you see the biggest opportunities from your perspective as a chef, as a grower, as a oyster farmer? Where do you see are the biggest opportunities to make further inroads into sustainability here in the food system in this region?
I think that we are in an incredible area because we are so close to the leadership that is making these decisions. And then the way that we're located, we have the city, and then we have out in Percival where our farm is, and we're surrounded by incredible farms. So people have access to that local food. And we have the opportunity to support those local farms, because it makes no sense that a lot of local farms that are, selling at DuPont Market, they can't even afford to eat their own food, those farmers, because they could sell it for more, and then they're eating the highly processed foods because they can't eat their own food because they're selling it for so much. But if we alter our system to support nutrient density rather than volume, and we're purchasing from these local farms instead of getting everything from grocery stores that are out of season in high volumes, and then having a ton of food waste, and then we're in the perfect spot for that. And consumers have so much put on them to make the right selections for their food, but we're kind of the people who have to make that shift. Systems aren't going to change on their own. So if they see people leading that example and supporting local farms, I think that's when we'll see systemic change.
Yeah, I'll echo that from the seafood side. I was just thinking that too, of like when you go and have seafood at your local restaurant, like ask where that seafood is coming from, especially your oysters. I know that like saltiness of oysters is a preference. So if you like really, really salty oysters, you like the New England oysters coming down here, that's great. Maybe just order like 6 of the local oysters, just, to keep them in business too, right? Because it's great that, I know a lot of farmers in Maine, but I know a lot of great farmers in Virginia and Maryland too, that also need our support. So I would just say, just continuously just keep asking your raw bars, your seafood restaurants for local seafood. And continuously keep asking, because when that demand is there from you guys and from us, then they're going to start filling that demand and start going to our local watermen and our local fishermen to be able to get that product in stock.
No, I think that's great. I think also asking what you like, definitely support all your farmers markets, especially here. You guys have like access to farmers markets almost every day of the week, especially in the spring. But like in the wintertime, do the food co-ops. Like get like that, like, a CSA delivered to your house. Do something like that to support everybody during the year. But I use that for the restaurant. So for me, I get to do it in a bigger way. But also demand more of your food. Like when you go to these restaurants, go to places, support them that support farmers, like restaurants like myself. Like we support local farmers, and they're listed on our website. They're listed on our menu, where we get everything from. You could call these people. They're real people. They have real names. They have real phone numbers. I don't just like blanket it like, oh, this is James Rivers Oysters. It's not. You can go ahead and call Travis, and you'll be like, Gina uses our oysters. Whatever, blah, right? So I think you as a consumer really have a lot of power when it comes to demanding what you want this environment and your food world to look like. It's big. It's bigger than just me and you. It's everybody working together.
So more Portlandia moments with the waitresses and waiters in the restaurant.
Could be.
So, okay, what's your favorite oyster? I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you had to pick, top 1 or 2 for flavor or for whatever, or seasonally, what's your favorite now? What's your favorite in the summer?
Okay, so we talked about this in the green room. Are you talking about brand? Or are you talking about species of oyster? You got to be a little bit more specific about what type of oyster.
Okay, who?
Virginica.
I mean, that's all East Coast. That's all the East Coast.
Coming from Colorado, you're talking to somebody who has no idea what he's talking about.
So you're talking about location. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like for me, I told them this in the green room. For me, West Coast seafood and East Coast seafood are like apples and oranges. They're very two different things. I like West Coast seafood just a tiny bit better. I'm not gonna lie. Blue crabs will always be the number one. But as far as oysters, I feel like when in the Chesapeake Bay we have like such a sweet, briny taste. When I love going up to New England in the summertime, but those oysters, my God, you get a headache just by having a couple of them because they're so salty. But in the wintertime, they're great. So I would say I like a mild oyster that has a little bit of salt, Chincoteagues are great. Love those kind of all year round. But yeah, I guess I would say West Coast oysters, just because they have a little bit more of a different flavor than
all right.
East Coast.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
All right, Samantha, what would you say is the favorite thing coming off your farm? What's your, what is the one thing that you just can't wait for when the season rolls around?
Well, there's a lot of different perspectives because our food pantries, their number one requested item are peppers. And so when our peppers are ready, I'm so excited because I know that families who wouldn't have access to food have been waiting for them all year, and we get to give that to them and their families. And I think that that's mostly convenience. It's easy to cut up a pepper and throw it in your kid's lunch and feel good about what they're eating. So just that whole scenario just brings me so much joy. I love eating beets, but my daughters, they're 1 and 2, and they will sit and eat cherry tomatoes for 3 hours straight at the farm. And that's good for me. I get a lot of work done, so I love cherry tomatoes.
All right, Gina, I called out knishes from Buffalo and Bergen, but what's your favorite go-to menu item when that you love the most,
For like seasonality?
or just for whatever that comes from your restaurant or from your farm?
Well, I mean, all right. Well, from our farm, like my favorite thing is that I got asparagus to finally come in. And that was amazing. Thank you. I will take that applause. That was some serious work. And we are able to like harvest that. But I love strawberry season because they're like super tiny and bright red. And if anybody was there, it is at my restaurant, you'll know that everything on the menu turns to strawberries. I think that my number one love on my menu though is got to be the knishes. It's the heart of my restaurant and my mom. My mom grew up on Buffalo Avenue, Bergen Street in Brooklyn, and knishes were a handmade thing they're made by grandmas, and it's just potato. It's very simple food. It's potato, onion, and flour and water, and a little bit of white wine actually goes in the dough, and it is a heart. It's a heart food. It's made with love. It's made by hand. Every knish is made by hand. They are all rolled by hand. And, everything in it is made something local. Like, it's nothing crazy. So I guess the knishes, and if you never had a knish, please have one. And if you say you're at this event, I'll even give you one. How about that? So come to Arlington and be like, I never had a knish, and we'll all sample knishes.
All right, I'm going to ask one more question here. And we've got a microphone here for... If any of you would like to ask a question, come on up to the microphone here. And while people are lining up, just one last question for you all. So if climate action in this region had a signature dish, what do you think it would be?
I think that's a y'all question. I'm not from here.
I don't think that it can be one dish, especially if we're talking about climate action, but maybe like a harvest bowl of some sort that changes seasonally, and it's local and seasonal.
I mean, mine would have to be some sort of like sustainable salmon, salad on a bagel that was made, like something like that, like that I could have like all year, that was like properly sourced. I use wild caught salmon, so it's not from exactly from here, but it is from Maine. So, but it is raw and real, and it is more expensive. So when you do come to my shop and you're like, I can get this in the grocery store for $11.99, I'm like, oh cool, but that's not where we got it from. Somebody went out and got your salmon, picked it. It's beautiful, and it's just the right color, and it's orange, and it's all the things it's supposed to be. So for me, it's a salmon salad on a bagel, served open faced with herbs from next door.
All right, thank you all. Questions? All right.
Hello. I have like 20, but I'm only going to ask one for now. So y'all mentioned knowing your farmer, but that's not the most scalable of things for the farmer. Like, one farmer can't, either they spend their time doing the farming, or they spend their time talking, to people about what they're doing with their farming. Do you have any thoughts or ideas on like kind of how that scales and how best to go about doing that?
Personally, I don't know who's familiar with 4P Foods. They're a produce hub. They're not just produce, but they are a local farm hub. So they purchase food from a ton of local farms, and then you order online and they'll deliver it to your door.
So they kind of do that middleman sort
Yeah.
of thing. What was it you said again?
4P.
4P.
My most important question of the night is for Gina. When are you opening at Clarendon?
So this is what I need from everybody in Arlington. Ready? I'm so glad you asked that question. I am stuck in 2 permits. I'm stuck in a review. So I'm gonna give you the real thing. I literally need them to just pass through one more section of electrical when we had no electrical work being done, and they're just sitting on that zoning department. So I asked, what was the name of the gentleman that introduced us? I asked him to please. Thank you. I asked him today. I gave him my number. I'm like, we're sitting there. Everything is ready to go. I cannot get this permit to get through and on the zoning. You don't. I'm stuck. I'm literally going to text tonight. Sooner than later now. How about that? Thank you. I knew I should do this panel. And thank you, Mark.
Hi, Gina. This question is also for you. Earlier, you said something about you need to know your farmer, especially when it comes to cucumbers. What is it about cucumbers?
So cucumbers, watermelon, anything like that uses so much water out of your soil, and your soil is the first thing that gets contaminated. So when you're eating a cucumber and you might have eaten something and you're like, oh, I feel like, might get sick from something, it could be that the soil is actually not good soil. So you need to know what's happening in your soil, your runoff, your water, especially in local gardens here, and you might have a giant high-rise next to you. That water's coming down, it's going into your soil, and now it's into your cucumber. So you have to be very, very careful. City farming, it's very hard, but very cool to do. You just need to have good soil practice. Know when you need to add nitrogen, know when you need to delete it, when you need to phosphorus, whatever. Oyster shells, very helpful, things like that in city farming.
Okay, thank you.
Did I say anything wrong?
I don't know city farming.
It's the truth. It's the truth. You gotta be careful.
I feel like you just set me up for that. I'm the former president of Arlington Friends of Urban Agriculture. We have a table in the main library there, but thank you everybody for coming. And when you were in Union Market, we opened at Union Market. I was there. I used to work for Catoctin Creek, so I've worked for organic producers, I've worked for kosher producers, and I've worked for regenerative producers. And my question is for all of you, but you mentioned eggs, and you mentioned organic, and I don't know that much about seafood, so I'm going to assume there's something similar, but labeling. I know a lot of the garbage around labeling and what organic means in theory, what it means on paper. The problems we're having with regenerative labeling now because there's no standard and there's this Walmartization of regenerative. What are your thoughts on any of that?
Eco-labeling is everywhere and on everything. The dolphin safe tuna was my example of that. Yeah, I would say that's very similar to the organic that we see on everything produce.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with what you said though about like eggs and farmers and stuff like that. They won't pay for the stamps. I think that when you buy, like for me, I shop for my kids and stuff. I don't not even at Whole Foods now. I go to even smaller grocery stores, and I live up in Frederick, so I do a lot of my grocery shopping there. I try to go to any of more like CSA. They don't have any stamps on anything, but I know that they're following better practices when it comes to smaller farming, hand gathered. You know what? Here's a good way to do it. Hand gathered. That is one thing that I've seen on a lot of eggs from small farm producers. When you see hand gathered, that's a really good indication that somebody really cared and the eggs are a different color and stuff like that. Try that for eggs.
One last thing, soil test kits are for everybody here. Soil test kits are available from the extension, and very often FUA gives them away as well. So test your soil.
Yes, do it.
Thanks so much for being here and for everything that you do. As I've been changing my diet over the last few years to be more conscious of it, the one pressure I keep running up against is culture. In my Vietnamese household and many other ethnic minority groups, I feel like our recipes that have been handed down over thousands of years weren't really given much thought in terms of sustainability and where our food comes from. So as we move in this direction of changing our diet, how do you feel on a sociological level? How do we confront the pressures that we feel from our own culture?
Oh, that's
I think that culture is so important, and that's not something that should be discarded in order to eat the current social suggestions, because those will change. What we grow at our farm is based on surveys to all of the families that we feed at the food pantry, because year one, we were growing what I like to eat as a white American. We got a lot of feedback that there was way too much broccoli, and that's just, it opened my eyes to how many different cultures we're serving and how many different things that we can grow. So there's so many herbs that you can add that tie back to your culture. You know, you can kind of health it up, but keep those recipes. Don't lose that culture, because that's so important to, you know, where your family came from, and just you need to keep that. I wouldn't move away from that.
Yeah. I would say on the seafood side, though, it might be a little different than, you know, like produce, right? Because I would say that a lot of, you know, minority groups or a lot of, like, you know, communities of color actually are using all parts of the seafood more than anybody else, from, you know, fish broth to, you know, just using the fish collars and everything like that. So I would keep that part. Because you guys know, definitely there are a lot of communities and a lot of cultures that know how to break down a fish and use every single part of it down to the eyeballs. So I would say keep that part of the culture for sure. But I think if you're coming up against sort of like that pressure, this is your time to like kind of carry your legacy forward in a different way. Not like, you know, Samantha said, not like totally kind of discard it, but sort of trying to figure out a new way that is a little bit more sustainable or has a little bit more ingredients, but still kind of has that cultural anchor to it too.
All right. Thank you so much.
Hi, and thank you all, and thank you for the organizers who put this together, because this is actually the year of the woman farmer. So I'm really excited to see so many women farmers here and restaurateurs. I've been noodling on some of the things you've all said, and I think my question is more for you, Mark, just on this element of access and economies to scale. We've talked about how our food system is broken. Some people complain when they see the expense of a sustainable salmon. I hear that all the time when I'm at a farmer's market. I could get this so much cheaper at a grocery store. What are maybe some of the partnerships, companies, elements that you're seeing that may excite you, opportunities where we can get access to nutritious food at a scale that Americans can afford?
Wow, that's the $6 million question right there. Because the food system that we have right now has been driven, it has roots that go back more than a century to food shortages that have led to the way we subsidize commodity crops. More politicians have been thrown out of office because of food shortages than maybe any issue, or food shortages, or the cost of food. It's a big issue right now. I think so. I've done a lot of work over my career with USDA and NRCS, and what I constantly heard as a scientist was the recommendations that we were putting forward, and the recommendations community groups were putting forward were being pushed. They were pushing up against demands that were coming from the economic sector, from the ag sector, that were driving towards commodity crop systems. The reason we have 95% of the meat produced in the U.S. today coming out of confined animal feeding operations is because there's been a push towards subsidizing cheap production of corn and soybeans. Corn is selling now for about the same price that my friend John, who's I've been staying with here in Alexandria, it was selling for between $3 and $4 a bushel back when he and I were growing up in the 70s in Nebraska. It's the same today. Similar for soybeans. And there's tremendous economic pressures filtering through federal and state policy to keep those prices low, to subsidize that, and drive those sorts of cheap calories, which are, I think all of us are talking about is not very healthy for us. So this is sort of a long way of saying, I think we need to demand more from our federal and our state and our local governments around these sorts of things. And unless we ask for these things and we're effective in helping to drive policy, our voices will continue to be drowned out. Okay.
Hello. Apologize, I'm going to give a second one to Mark. You showed the numbers on the screen, and people know about beef. It's 5-10x more GHGs than some of the other foods. And I think most people think it's just cow farts, which is a pretty small part actually. Can you connect the dots for people here around beef, land use, deforestation, and the associated carbon that goes along with that? Thanks.
Thank you for that question. So what we're talking about here is depending on where the beef comes from, that collective carbon footprint can be anywhere from 30 to over 60 pounds of carbon dioxide equivalents for every pound of beef that you eat. And at the lower end, it's coming from dairy animals that once they're done with their milking cycle, they're no longer considered to be producing efficiently. They go to the slaughterhouse. And it's considered to be a lower carbon footprint because the emissions are shared amongst all the dairy products that animal produced before it was harvested to be or processed to become meat, compared with a beef animal that is raised in a confined animal feeding operation. Those emissions can be over 60 pounds. And what you're talking about here, the major component of that is, and it's actually, not to get weird about this, but it's actually the cow belches. It's not the cow farts. Although there is a piece of that. The methane comes from both ends of the cow, but but it's interesting. This evolutionary miracle that allows cattle to be cattle is that they have this first stomach. It's called the rumen, and they can eat the grass or the forage that normally wouldn't be digestible, but it's microbes that are in that rumen that are actually digesting that forage on behalf of the cow and turning it into something that the cow can actually absorb and use and turn it into active energy or proteins. But along with that, and I'm so glad you brought up deforestation, there's so much land that's required to produce the forage to feed both dairy animals and beef animals. It requires like 6 to 10 times as much land to produce a pound of animal protein as it does to produce a pound of plant protein. And it's because the food has to be cycled through that rumen of the cow. They're just not very efficient at converting that stuff into human food. And where that comes in is right now, in order to create enough land to produce the soybeans and the corn and the hay and the other things that cattle and other ruminants eat, is the only way to do that now is to cut down forests, because virtually all the farmable farmland that's available to produce forage is being used to produce forage today. If we're going to eat more animal-based protein, we have to deforest more areas, and most of that is happening in the tropics, in Brazil and Indonesia and other places. And these are some of the most carbon-rich parts of the planet right now. They're also fundamentally important for regulating the climate. And so what's happening right now, what the scientific community is clear about, is we actually need to be reforesting these areas right now, turning a lot of these areas back to their native forests from crop production rather than deforesting more areas. And that's where the big part of the carbon footprint comes from.
Hi, thank you so much. And thanks to the Climate Policy Office for putting on this awesome event. So we heard from our Assistant County Manager for Climate Policy, Jen Fioretti, that we're going to be putting together a climate action plan. So I'm wondering, kind of, as we think about a community strategy for greening our food policy, maybe a 5-year plan, even if it's just kind of a bumper sticker at this point, what do you think should be components of that strategy, that long-term plan for our community? Thank you.
I can weigh in with one idea that you already have a good start on, and that's composting. Anything that you can do to keep food and yard waste out of the landfill and divert it into a composting program is every pound of methane you avoid getting produced in a landfill is a pound of cure. It's incredibly important right now, reducing and eliminating methane emissions where we can. That is the great challenge of climate action in our time today, and it's been defined by myriad scientists that are working on this field. Carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide emissions, those are a big deal, but right now we need to be reducing methane emissions in order to reduce the chance that we would exceed a tipping point and drive the climate into what's considered to be a methane feedback loop. So I just say anything that could be done to reduce methane emissions and keeping the waste out of the landfill is one of the most effective ways to do that. And
That's definitely what we practice, is zero waste, like 100%. And don't throw everything away. Try to like fix it and use it. That's definitely another thing, right?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Also, yeah, with the oyster shells too, I know that there are a lot of initiatives and a lot of organizations, Oyster Recovery Partnership, that is, really big into keeping oyster shells out of the landfill because they can go right back into the water and create oyster reefs and start that cycle over. So I would also plug that too.
It's funny you say that because I work on emissions control. But my question was for Imani. Thanks for the conversation, all of you. I had a brief stint as a commercial fisherman in the Pacific Northwest. So my question to you is, during your time in the seafood industry on the East Coast, have you seen the narrative change, at least from the production side? Like fishermen, oyster farmers, has there always been like this backing of the science, or is that more recent? Like what's going on?
Yeah, I think the narrative of just being a waterman or a fisherman is always, kind of the Long John Silver's type looking guy. No one's really pegging me to be an oyster farmer when I walk into a room. And oftentimes they're like, is that really what you do? I'm like, yeah, I just like to put it, for the giggles. But yeah, I think it's starting to change, right? Social media is really kind of, I don't know what your algorithm looks like, but mine is all fishermen right now. And I absolutely love it from all over, especially Alaska. I think it's starting to change because people can see it, right? I think before it was kind of like a, just kind of like a pipe dream or something that was like, oh, that'd be super cool to see, or you really only see fish in the aquarium or when you're eating it and stuff. And now people get to see kind of all the different things that people can go through. I just, before I came here, saw an oyster farmer that I know up in Maine chainsawing the ice to get to the cages and being like, this is how your deliveries are going to get there on time. So I think, yeah, the narrative just around seafood in itself is changing, which I think is also then kind of creeping into the people, like the fishermen and the watermen that are a part of it too. So
just taking its time. That's good, because when I was there, it was, you have trash, just chuck it overboard. So.
Yeah. No, and I feel like, there also is that narrative too that they're not, climate crusaders. Because we do have some bad apples, but I do think the majority of fishermen and watermen really do want to see the environment thrive. They can read it like the back of their hand, and so they can know, they sense changes even before sometimes scientists do. They just don't know the language to really say it and point it out. And so I think, yeah, they've always kind of been a part of, it's kind of like farmers where we kind of put it on them of they're destroying our land, right? It's the same thing with fishermen, but it's really kind of the opposite. I think a lot of them really do want to have a more sustainable industry.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, for the three of you guys, as like producers and business owners that are trying to better position American consumerism within natural systems, how are you guys accounting for the disruptions and imbalances already in the systems, like both from the science behind for what you guys are doing and the way you think about your businesses to the actual like economic business models that you're working with? Like, because I'm sure there's a lot of uncertainty and seasons don't change the way they used to. So how are you doing? How are you doing with that?
Thank you for that.
I mean, we don't really fit into it, so you'll have to carry it. Just because we are a nonprofit, we're here to kind of just fill the gaps and feed the people who are getting missed. And yeah, so we're just trying to help out where they've left us behind. Yeah.
I'll say that it's incredibly expensive to care. And I take that from the bottom of, it's always on the bottom line, right? Every time I make a decision to compost, use compostable, use a different napkin, use something that's recycled like 5 times, whatever on recycling, like it's been like something like a jeans all the way now it's your napkin, right? And like not to use something that was cut. It comes to me on my profit side. Everyone's always like, oh, you must make so much money because you own restaurants. I'm like, oh, I'm the person that cares what your food comes from, what you're eating, and everything. I am a big proponent of helping to lobby for change in pricing and food. One of my locations happens to be in Capitol Hill. I do have the ear of some people that are, they just listen to what you have to say. But it's hard. It's hard to not want to cut corners when I know that my competitors or my direct competitors feed you such minimally good for you food. And I want to do it so badly when I see that they just bought a boat and you're like, fuck. Ooh, sorry. I shouldn't have said that, but it's true. Yeah. And you're like, I'm still driving a Honda Pilot and I'm worried about electric cars and stuff. So, I think for me, I will get there on like my own terms, but I have 2 little girls that have to face this world, and I have nieces and nephews, and I am first generation in this country, and my father came from a very small town in Italy. So I'm just trying my hardest to give you how I grew up in all of my family and my world, and that your children, when you come there, you can feel good about what you're eating, what they're eating, and you're never like, oh my gosh, I can't give them that. I think the worst thing that I have in my restaurant for you to eat is perhaps Heinz ketchup, and that's not that bad. So there you go.
And
that answer it?
From the nonprofit side, yeah, I mean, minorities in agriculture, I think you can probably suspect what I've been going through with federal grants and things like that. So all of your support is very necessary. Absolutely. But yeah, I think I kind of saw the writing on the wall, right, with DEI and just sort of how that was kind of losing steam probably 2 years ago. But I think the beauty of what we were already doing was at the core of workforce development anyway. And, now with, everyone or, the majority of people in the U.S. wanting to have U.S.-based seafood, the only way that we're going to be able to do that is with a viable workforce development. So it kind of already fit. It just so happens that I'm taking a smaller bite out of the larger elephant, right? Really advocating for the demographics that I personally sit in for women and women of color. But that's only from a perspective and an experience standpoint, not from what we can do or anything like that. I think a lot of people are like, well, how do you get, these people interested in aquaculture and the maritime industry? I'm like, we literally had our internship applications open for a week and we had 30 applications from all over the world. Wow. So it's there, and it's like if you build it, they will come. I just, I love more champions so that we can continue to build so that they can have somewhere to come to, for sure.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for coming here tonight and helping us to continue this discussion. We really appreciate it. Look for more information about the Climate Action Plan coming out soon. And I really want to give a big thank you to our panel for being here today.